Welcome back. We took a couple of years off here. This is just meant to be a brief overview of the major French wine regions and wines. This was originally created for our OLLI, Lifetime Learning, here at Greenville, South Carolina at Furman. Wine tasting we had last April of the best of France. We picked a bottle out of each of these areas. Anyway, we're going to cover Loire, Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Rhone at a somewhat high level. And I hope this is helpful if it's your first trip to France or your first trip to really do wine tasting in France. We're going to start off with the Loire Valley. The Loire Valley runs east to west and is a few hours south of France. As a friend of mine told me, it depends on your speed. Very east, becoming more famous is the Sancerre wine, which we'll go into in more detail. Across the Loire River from Sancerre is an area called Puy-Fumé, Puy-sur-Loire, and the wine is Puy-Fumé. It's a very nice wine. Both of these are 100% Sauvignon Blanc. You travel on, I did, from east to west several years ago, and you find Loire Valley River runs through it from one end to the other and ends up in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's sometimes just a couple inches deep. They're not going to find any big, heavy-bodied red wines in this region. Not going to happen. Bourgogne is probably the closest you'll come. The most famous red, I think, is like around Saumur. Saumur-Champagny is a Cabernet Franc. Years ago, Anjou was a famous region when we liked sweeter rosés. I think that's coming back now as a drier region. But this area is famous for a lot of different things that I'll go into it for a few minutes. But it is, you can do it, drive through the whole thing in one day, but that means you're not stopping and really taking advantage of a lot of things from one end to the other. This is highlighting some of the key things about the Loire Valley. Number one, the chateaus. You know, you've seen Chambord Liqueur and the label on it. Beautiful chateaus in this region. You can stop, you can tour them. Vineyards, when you drive along the road, I saw a lot of signs for fresh asparagus going through a long time ago. And the thing I didn't know at the time was when I was driving on the road on the other side of the Loire, up on the cliffs, were these troglodyte caves. They're carved into the hillside. Just trying to figure out, were these just built? No, they were built hundreds of years ago by the Romans. Now, some of them are habitable today. Some are even vacation spots. The thing to think about here when you're talking about these famous wines, again, is they're 100% Sauvignon Blanc. But the French don't annotate their wines by the grape. They annotate them by the region because they really believe the regions from one to another are so different. You need to know that distinction. For example, these two right here, Sancerre being a drier, thinner body, elegant, Sauvignon Blanc, while Puy-Fumé is smoother, background wine, better with food. And this region too, particularly Sancerre, is famous for the cylindrical goat cheese. I once had an opportunity to stay in an auberge, and the next day they were having the big Sauvignon Blanc, the big Sancerre festival. And they're having it with the crottin, the French bread, in caves, in caves. They had the bar set up in the cave. You could see your breath. It was very cool. This is the troglodytes on the other side of the Loire when you're driving along. Like, what the heck is that? I'd never heard of them. And of course, the elegant chateaus. The wine in particular that we were tasting at this time was a Pascal Jolivet Sancerre. You can find it around without a whole lot of trouble. But the prices of Sancerre have shot up quite a lot in the last 3 years. I went from like mid-20s to now pretty much mid-30s. This one would probably be hard to find 30 right now. It's clean, fresh, great acidity. It is wonderful for the heat and humidity that we have in South Carolina in the summer. And now it's one of the most popular whites in the United States. I had a friend who was on a cruise and said it was very hard to find a night that the cruise line had any in stock. They kept selling out so fast. This is the little village of Sancerre. On my agenda for my next trip, I got to go there and find some hopefully more reasonably priced Sancerres. I do love that wine, but it's getting harder to find. We're going to shift now. We're going to head a little bit more east of Paris and to the Burgundy region. You're going to hear me compare and contrast pretty easily Bordeaux versus Burgundy. They both are so important to the French wine business and our palates. It's just helpful to understand how they are so different in many respects. First of all, one of the reasons is the Napoleonic Code in Burgundy reversed the law, which said you had to leave your estate to your firstborn son. If you're the second-born son, you knew you had to get a career. But when this changed, all the kids got a piece of the vineyard. That often means today that somebody owns a row of grapes and that's it. They certainly can't afford to make the wine and market it. So that caused the creation of these négociants, like famous names you probably heard: Drouhin, Latour, Jadot, Chanson. Many of them own and grow their own grapes, but often they bring those grapes together, but they're still known on the label by the distinct place they came from. And that distinction is by region, district, commune, all the way down to vineyard. If it's all the way down to the vineyard, it's probably a very expensive wine. If it stays up at a very region level, it's probably not as expensive, but you're getting more of a generic instead of a distinctive taste out of it. And each of these regions have very distinctive tastes. The other thing to know when you're talking about Burgundy is if it's a red, it's 100% Pinot Noir. If it's a white, it's 100% Chardonnay. But the label doesn't tell you that. It really tells you something much more distinctive, which is, what is this thing going to taste like based on where it's coming from? First of all, we're getting a high-level look at the Burgundy region. And I've highlighted where we were tasting, which was a Gevrey Chambertin. Included in this region, technically, is also Chablis. I consider Chablis very detached and the wine so different, but it is 100% Chardonnay. It's smooth, it's expensive. It is a very nice wine. I highly suggest that you try those and see if you like them. And then we're going to go in. Well, let me stop for a second, talk a little bit more about this region. The Côte d'Or, the Golden Coast, Côte d'Or, is what the whole region is known as. It's broken into the Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune. The Côte de Nuit, where all those purples are, is pretty much all the Premier Crus and Grand Crus in Burgundy. All those little towns make a distinctive, different version of Pinot Noir. 100% Pinot Noir, 100% Pinot Noir. So if you like Pinot Noir, this is the place to really test your palate. Again, the Côte de Nuit goes from the city of Beaune all the way up to Dijon, the home of the hot mustard. Below the Côte d'Or, the Côte de Beaune, which is below Beaune, is pretty much the most expensive whites in the world. You may have heard of Meursault, Puligny-Montrachet, Cassagne-Montrachet. Those are really big whites, a little hard to just have as a background with food. They are pronounced, they're large, they're expensive. Also in that region are a couple of really nice, smooth, gentle Pinot Noirs. Pommard and Volnay are examples too. You get down in the south here, and you're talking about less expensive Chardonnays, and they'll probably have a little bit of wood in them. Most of these up here do not. I want to dwell in just a little bit closer to where I was focusing this tasting on, which is Gevrey Chambertin. But you can taste some fantastic Pinot Noirs from village to village to village. The center of each of these villages usually has a center for tasting and buying wine. The center of Gevrey Chambertin, the center of Maurice Saint-Denis, certainly Maurice Saint-Denis. Gevrey Chambertin, I suggest going to hit one of the restaurants. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then just to restate, the Côte d'Or, one. Cote Nuit has most of the Grand Cru reds. Gevrey-Chambertin in particular is one of the most famous, colorful, black currant. I don't get licorice out of it that much. Definitely great with coq au vin, with beef bourguignon, which is a beef, red wine stew, strong cheeses. The one we're tasting in particular, just have the details here. It costs $70. It's aged in French oak, well balanced raspberries, good depth, crisp, medium acidity. And I love the village of Gevrey-Chambertin. I'll show you a couple pictures of it in a minute. Again, the Côte de Beaune, the Volnay Pomard I talked about, that are reds, but they're very soft, they're velvety, very nice. And these expensive, huge body whites. Also, these other regions that are considered technically as part of Burgundy, but I certainly don't. The reason I don't with Beaujolais is, one, the grape's totally different, it's Gamay, and two, they use carbonic maceration, which really is pumping CO2 into the wine, which gives it an entirely different taste and body. So I think it's, again, a misnomered kind of place. This is a view from my hotel room, one of the last trips over into Burgundy. I was just over there a couple months ago. This was the year I think I was there for Vendage. And it was so neat to hear the music out in the vineyards. You heard church bells ringing like every 15 minutes. Little villages surrounded by vineyards. And the wineries' headquarters for tasting are often in the center of the town. And this is, you walk to downtown Gevrey-Chambertin. You walk to the restaurant. Everything is so close. The best wine I've ever had in my life was a Chambertin. And the vineyard itself is about the size of 2 football fields. And this sign says, "Here starts Chambertin." This is one of the little wineries downtown Gevrey-Chambertin. Cute, great town. I highly recommend it. This is the street of downtown Chambertin. On the left, there's a great little spot for a happy hour. And one of the hosts is a little bichon frisé puppy dog. Well, there's a great restaurant here for I taste wines and then figure out what I want to go buy and what vineyards I want to hit. Down the street a few blocks is a great restaurant that has sorry for the interruption, that has great gougère and coq au vin, and food's great. There's also a new Institute of Food and Wine in downtown Dijon, right on the edge, the southern edge, near Gevrey-Chambertin. And I highly recommend to go check that out. It's the history of everything in France, of food, of tableware, plates, silverware. And they have a great place to taste wine there. They have a great little store for all kinds of Dijon mustards. It's pretty new and it's very nice. This is an adjunct in Gevrey-Chambertin to one of the Drouhin wineries, but it's located down in the village. This is what you're getting into when you get into the city of Beaune. It's really the capital of Burgundy. Here's where the major negociants have their wine tasting, their wineries and their tasting rooms. Drouhin, Chanson, Jadot. And it was originally a walled-in city. A lot of these wineries, like Champy, have their vineyards below ground. They own all this ground below, where all their wine manufacturing facilities are, and then they pump it up for the tasting or the bottling. This is, I think, Chanson's barrel room in Beaune. Definitely. I had the opportunity to have a tour and tasting for one in Beaune at Chanson, thanks to Richard at Northampton Wines. This is one of the original grape presses for the Drouhin, from a tour of the Drouhin winery in downtown Beaune. So you can't tell, kind of a note about Burgundies, and I can talk a lot about them. But instead, we're moving on to our second to last region. This is going to be Rhone. Rhone is one of those areas that is 2 distinct, totally different sub-areas. Northern Rhone is so different from Southern Rhone. One of these days, I'm thinking they're going to chop it right in the middle. It's got different grapes, different climate, different ambiance. So we're focusing on Southern Rhone. Southern Rhone is most famous for the blends of Grenache. Couldn't think of it there for a second, because there's Grenache, depends on what country, but Grenache blends. They're also known, a lot of these blends, as GSMs, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre. You probably heard of Côte de Rhone. Côte de Rhone is probably the weeknight wine, I'd say, of the region. But when I was over on business, I could afford a Côte de Rhone on my per diem, but maybe not a whole lot else. But I also, if you recommend, if you get around here, try the Gigonda, try the Vaccarat. Those are some pretty nice Grenache blends, but not to be left out at all. And the one we're going to be focusing on is Châteauneuf du Pape. It's probably one of the most well-known wines from France. Anything else? Taval for rosé. But the key thing to think about here is, one, Chateau de Neuf. Chateau, the Chateau Neuf means new, de of the Pope. So it's a new chateau of the Pope. The Pope moved the winery there, excuse me, moved the papacy to Châteauneuf du Pape in 1308. One of the distinct things about the terroir here is there are large rocks at the bottom of every vine. You don't see earth, and so the vines have to fight harder to get water. That's supposed to be one of the characteristics of some of the great vines, some of the great grapes, is how hard they have to fight for water. You don't want vines that have wet feet. You can have up to 13 grapes. I keep hearing of more grapes, 14, 15. But the last time I went to a tasting, I had the opportunity to have it with Robert Parker down in Atlanta. He was saying there are 13. And again, the GSM is kind of what they're known as today. You'll see those three together a lot, and the predominant percentage of the grapes will be Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. Okay, this particular Châteauneuf du Pape, a full body. Yeah, they're known. Châteauneuf du Pape's known for pretty full body. Also, you'll still get a lot of, characteristics of the grape. It's not something that will be, aged out very easily. And that, I think, is really nice. So they've got character to them. They're still very smooth. This one is 80% Grenache and had 14, 16 months in oak barrel. Very good with red meats, prime rib. These are the galets that you see in each of the vineyards when you're down there. I had the opportunity to go to a restaurant that I picked because it had 42 different Châteauneuf du Papes, which is pretty hard to taste, but definitely went well with the escargot, the foie gras. And the foie gras was presented with little green apple rounds drizzled with maple syrup. It was really, really good. Now a major shift, we're going back up. Finish the cycle around to the East Coast, and we're talking about Bordeaux. Bordeaux means border of the water, and it's right on the Atlantic. I'll be making, again, contrast and conflict with what's like in Burgundy. They're so different. I consider Burgundy, they're grape farmers. They got hip boots on. They make the wine. They when they're out there, they're getting dirty. In Bordeaux, the winery owner is living in a chateau, and he's always in a coat and tie, and it's very hard to taste at his chateau. The first growth classifications were determined in 1855, and there's only been one change since then, and that was 1973. They were based at the time upon the highest selling price over the last 100 years. But a famous quote from Baron Philippe de Rothschild was, "First I am, second I was. Mouton does not change," meaning we're always great. Just took them a long time to figure it out. I want to go into this area a little bit more because it then gives you a concept of the distinction of how there are two different areas here. We've got the left bank, which is left of Gigonda River, and the right bank. And there are a lot of distinguishing characteristics. And it's good to know if you're going to go taste there or you're going to buy wine from there, which side of the wine do you like? And therefore, where do you want to go? Where do you want to zero in and find out more distinctively what you like the most? The left bank, Melbec, Saint-Estèphe, Mouly, Margaux, Haute-Médoc, Grave, all of these areas are predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon. The winds coming in from the Atlantic, the soil, the temperature, everything lends itself to the Cabernet Sauvignon grape. The other side, known as the right bank, is where you see Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, and these are predominantly Merlot. And everything about this region lends itself to the growth of excellent Merlot grapes. One of the distinctions is, of course, since it's primarily Cabernet Sauvignon, it's going to take longer to age. These are more expensive. These aren't drink now. These are the wines that when you taste them, you say, gee, what is this going to taste like in 10 years? Will I be happy with my investment? While on the right bank, you're going to say, do I like this wine now? I'm going to be able to drink it in the near future. So here we're zeroing in a little bit on Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. Again, I'm just going over the highlights. Predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, a maritime climate. The soil is more gravelly. Even that southern region was named Grave. Some of the famous wineries in Saint-Estèphe, you got Côte-Éternel, Pauillac, Lafite Rothschild, and Mouton Rothschild, Saint-Julien, Chateau Gloria. And these are known as chateaus. Well, in Burgundy, they're known as domains. So we've got, again, another distinction. This is the city of Bordeaux, right on the water. It is a business city. It is cement. It is on the water, which really helped with the trade of Bordeaux wine all around Europe. Got a lot of nice restaurants. And this is the countryside. These are the chateaus that are wineries. They handle everything from soup to nuts. It's a dynasty. You're born into one of these wineries, and it will be your career and your children's career. The right bank, like we said, predominantly Merlot, cooler limestone and clay, smaller estates, smaller production. Saint-Emilion is a charming city. That's just an understatement. Cobblestone roads, really nice little quaint restaurants, kind of an antithesis of large city of Bordeaux. Smoother, more drink now. The one we were tasting was 85% Merlot with no Melbec or Cab Sauv at all. Another famous one is Pétrus. It's 100% Merlot. This is a rendition of the little streets around Saint-Emilion. I highly recommend visiting it. It's very charming. That's it. I hope you liked this introduction to French wines. We'll be going in the future into some of the other regions that we haven't covered here.